Hello, today we're here with Dante DiStefano, and he's going to read his work and we'll discuss it for Sign and Breath. Welcome, Dante.
Thank you, Phil. My favorite things. Why am I always querying myself into a single endless couplet repeated in note after note of a poem that does not want to lineate itself in the language of the electrocardiogram? I will continue to pour my discourse into the river of blinking cursors at the document's imagined edge. Place two fingers on my wrist and listen for the mountain brook as it recites an unseen horizon. There will never be enough time to say all the words contained in the galaxy of white space pinwheeling around this comma. And every golden phoneme that ghosts my throat is yes, and love. And the way the wind jaws the boughs of a linden tree in my memory, the eyelashes of my newborn son opening in an unending blue hour as a star whose name I don't know blinks through the living room curtains. My 4-year-old daughter's hand clamped onto my own as she falls asleep, listening to the dull edge of a once upon a time I deja vu us into each night before bed. The dog, a doodle of sunlight, curled on the couch in the afternoon, pretending grace as a pat on the muzzle. My wife in any season, unhusking the vowels that echolocate the verbs flying in my knuckles and transform them into psalms. All this reaching against time and railing against death and singing truculently and mellifluously into the numb maw palpitating decay in the hundred hearts of the residuary worm. What I mean to say is all the poems I've ever written leap to life right here and tell you I am alive. And I love you. These poems, little metropolises of pain and joy, dioramas of so much longing and striving and being, restorative utterances on the verge of unsaying, all these misprisionings of the half-known and the intuited and the holy, 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 inscrutable, palpable brokenness that binds one, you and me, to the volta of the moment. Any moment, a poem, these poems, and I hold them out greenly and dumbly and frailly and fiercely. My hand and your hand become two sparrows banking against an overcast sky. And I keep holding forth the poem's arc, the poem's arcs for you, 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 for.
Wow. Thank you, Dante. That reads, as I'm following it, as I had it up on the screen, looking at it and hearing you is such a kind of disorienting rhythmic experience. Tell me a little bit about how this piece came about and why you chose it for this particular project.
Well, when you asked me to be part of the anthology yesterday, I immediately thought of a poem that I wrote called A Love Supreme, which is written in a similar form and has similar.
Please excuse the interruption. Relia Argro to the main office. Relia Argro to the main office, please.
Poetic concerns and aesthetic considerations. But that poem was way too long. So I wrote this poem yesterday and this morning. And, you know, obviously the title evokes John Coltrane, who is my, you know, the artist who I, you know, admire the most and whose work has taught me so much about writing how, it's amazing how in 12 years he could, create a body of work as impressive as any artist in the history of the world. And there's something about the spirituality and the questing and the effusiveness within the restraint that to me is, instructive for a poet or for poetry, because poetry is all about the negotiation of the tension between restraint and effusion, structure and surprise. And really, when you listen to how Coltrane transforms this Rodgers and Hammerstein show tune into this incredible work of art, that kind of alchemy is what I'm after with the word, or with these interior fluencies that I'm attempting to bring out into the world. That's, what you call voice, I guess, right? The voice is like the adjunct to these interior fluencies that you try to transcribe.
Well, I have to say first, Dante, thank you for joining us from your teaching situation, and I love that. I love the fact we're getting voices. So much of your work also emerges from your teaching that we should say that. And your new book, Lullaby with Incendiary Devices, it's going to appear in Generations, includes elegies and issues that come out of the voice that we heard in the background. So I'm so delighted that we didn't plan that.
I thought it might happen.
I'm so glad that it did occur, because that gives us another perspective. And the other thing that gives me a perspective on what you just said, your days must be minutes and eons. If you wrote this complex and beautiful and experimental poem yesterday and today, I think when I looked at it, I said, well, this is carved in Ogham script and was written by some druid 1,000 years ago and was translated. It feels like it's lived that long. I guess the question I really want to get to, you write in a variety of modes, and sometimes you obviously use lineation, maybe not in a traditional sense, but in a sense we're used to seeing in a poem. And sometimes you write in, I've seen prose poems. I have not seen you use this particular technique before. Tell me about this technique and why you chose it. What it means not to have a poem in its traditional rectangular shape.
Right. I'm so much of my life in poetry, I'm just interested in understanding poetry as a variegated field and not as a monolith. So I've always been drawn to form, but it strikes me that every choice one makes in a poem is a formal choice, is some kind of means of constraint. But this particular poem is a prose poem, but it also includes caesura marks, which would be used in, scansion. And, you're seeing a lot of prose poems that employ backslashes or virgules or whatever you want to call them. And, that is definitely a metapoetic gesture. This poem is metapoetic and a kind of ars poetica, and as a prose poem, but it connects with the tradition of writing prose poetry, which is variegated. Again, this is more in the David Anton talk poem, Jack Kerouac, Old Angel Midnight kind of experimental vein, but it's also, it has a strange pedigree that I don't really want to quantify, right? Because as Harvey Hicks would remind us, all genre and maybe all form is, artificial, right? These are just artifices that we employ, and we attempt to impose order on the things that we make, and the effusions of our imagination and our outpourings. But yeah, there's a big, poetry lives this tripartite life in the body. I feel that really viscerally. I know you do too, Phil, but there is something very visceral, palpably visceral about poetry. Before you even get to the moment of invention, or before you dwell in the composition stage, the poems are there, vibrating with an intensity in your knuckles, in your heart as a muscle, not as a metaphor, in your lungs, in your body. But then it also lives on the page in a particular way, and then it has this other life in the air as a spoken thing. And I'm always cognizant of those three manifestations of the poem. And so I don't know if I really answered anything that you said, but I went into digressions of the sunlight, right?
That's right. That's right. Many paths. This is such a fresh poem. I don't think I've ever heard, I've never had the privilege of hearing something so fresh, and yet, of course, we're being recorded. So I have to think that this is the first time that you have voiced this poem for others. Perhaps not, but it may be. And what did it feel like, Dante, to say that for the first time?
Well, I've been saying it. I always, when I'm writing, I'm always reading it aloud. That's one thing. Like, I write the first draft of it, then I keep reading it aloud as much as I can, because, I have to do things like put my 4-year-old to bed, or help my wife with a baby, or, teach during my school day, or whatever else I have to do. So I'm kind of reading it around all of these things. And I mean, I think people probably think I'm a crazy person, but that's not right. And so whenever I can, I'm reading. So it's the first time somebody else has heard it. But it's been spoken as much as it possibly could be spoken aloud in the time between yesterday and today. So like, after my wife and I put our daughter to bed and the baby was asleep, I just sat in a chair and said it like 10 or 15 times before I went to sleep. And then in the morning, I kind of revised it and riffed it into what it is now. And again, read it many times throughout my school day, when I had, an empty classroom, which wasn't that often, but I have a couple free periods. So, it got a good workout before it came to you. But that's kind of my process, partially, with everything, no matter what poem, and this poem, it's also like the caesuras are meant to kind of score how you should read it, and to indicate the length of a breath. So there's these long loping passages, and then there are these short intervals too. And again, that's something, I'm learning from Coltrane, like getting, these repetitive structures, these riffs that you go on chorus after chorus, and then, you're searching really, and you're risking a lot by doing that, because it could all collapse. I mean, the poem, I didn't know. I mean, I think this poem works as what it is, but, there's a lot of risk inherent in this structure. But, you should always be willing to put yourself out there and possibly sound crazy.
Well, when I think, Dante, when I think of you reciting this poem around your work and putting your young child to sleep, and after your wife is sleeping, I have to think of W.C. Williams, who danced naked around the house. And Dante, who will not say that you are not the happy genius of your house?
I love that poem, Danceroos. Yeah.
So much, Dante DiStefano, for joining us with Sign and Breath.